All right, this topic is FIRE, which stands for Financial Independence Early Retirement. So, FIRE is a kind of a philosophy of personal finance that I thought I would share with you because, well, for one thing, it's a little different from what quote unquote normal people would think of as how to live their life, but it does illustrate a lot of, I think, useful ideas in personal finance that I want to communicate to you. And so I'm going to present these ideas, and even though you might think it's really good, and that's great, but even if you don't, if you kind of dial it back, say 50%, then they represent like pretty useful ways to live your life, even if you don't kind of go all the way. Okay, so with that said, let's get into it. So, what is financial independence retire early FIRE? So basically, it's getting out of the quote unquote rat race, or the 9 to 5 drudgery, as they call it. Basically, making it so that you don't have to go to work. You can retire early, as says it in the name. So, is it possible to, for example, retire at age 30, 40, 50? And so we're going to take a look and see if that is indeed possible. Okay, so there's a few steps involved in doing this. So step one is getting a job where you can earn a relatively large amount of money while you're relatively young. I think some common choices for FIRE people seem to be computer science and computer engineering, both jobs where you can get a quite high salary with just your bachelor's degree, 4 years university, and away you go. But there could be lots of other choices that you could make. The thing to be careful of is, you don't want to make a choice where, well, according to the FIRE people, you don't want to make a choice where you're taking a long time to before you can start actually earning money. So, for example, being a doctor, you're looking at post-secondary of 10, 12, sometimes even more years. Yes, after you graduate, you're making a lot of money, but by the time you're, a full-fledged doctor making that, kind of high salary, you're into your early to mid 30s. And for FIRE people, they would like to be retired by then. So then that doesn't work for them. Same thing with other kind of jobs that require, more advanced degrees, lawyer, etc. Yeah, these jobs just require too much education in which you are sacrificing your like earning potential for those early years. So when I say, you're doing this, and it doesn't necessarily mean you're doing something that you hate. Maybe you're not into computer science or computer engineering. That's fine. There's other choices. But the thing is, your efficiency has a priority over like passion and doing what you love. You might be doing something that you can tolerate. It's not like your favorite thing to do in the world, but it's fine. It gets you your salary. And so FIRE people would say that's more important than doing something that you quote unquote love. And in fact, to be honest, like I think a lot of people in even non-FIRE people, they're kind of there too. They don't love their job. They're just doing it because, well, that's their job. And if they don't do their job, then they're not going to have, not going to be able to put food on the table, etc. Okay, so that's step one. Step two is spending as little as possible while still having a decently good life. So basically, try and save as much as you can, but not sacrificing everything. We can say sacrificing maybe some things. So here are some things that you might sacrifice. You might not go out to eat or buy a coffee every day. Stuff like that, gets expensive. Coffee is like $3-4. Going out to eat is probably $15-20 anytime you do it. And over the long run, if you don't do those things, that will save you money. Don't do expensive hobbies, instead of taking whatever, skydiving lessons or something like that, and spending $500 every week or two. Maybe your hobby is reading, and you're borrowing books from the library to do that. It costs you literally $0. shop sales. So when you do shop stuff or when you do buy stuff, make sure that you're getting the best deal that you can, and that you're trying not to buy it at the regular price, but that you're buying it at kind of a sale price. Don't buy a lot of expensive clothing or accessories. Yeah, I mean, probably everyone knows that clothing, there are expensive ones, there are cheap ones, and they would say buy the cheaper ones. Don't take a lot of expensive trips, and so I think we have an example of that later on. And try not to have any debt, because as we saw in previous lessons, when you do have debt, you have to spend a lot of your money paying the interest on that debt, which is really, you're not getting anything for that money. You're just going, that money is going out the door and you're not getting really any benefit from it. So if you don't have debt, then you don't have to spend that. Car and house are the two most expensive things typically. And so they would say try and save as much as you can on that. For cars, try not to have a car. If you do have a car, don't go into debt to buy that car, because of course then you have to pay interest. Buy a used car instead of new car. I have I have a Toyota Sienna. I bought it used for $5,000. If I had bought that same car new, it would have been somewhere $40,000 or $45,000. I could literally buy like 9 of those used cars for one new one. So used instead of new. Now, of course, keeping in mind that the expenses for maintenance and stuff will be higher, but certainly not like high enough that it will make it more worthwhile to buy a new car. I have also bought new cars, so and I loved the car that I bought new, and so there's reasons for that. But if you are a fire person, they would say buy like the cheapest thing that will get you from point A to point B, and if you don't need it, then don't even buy that. There's been like long times of my life where I haven't needed or used a car, and so that would be even better. For housing, you live in a cheaper area, live in a cheaper apartment. We're going to talk a lot more about housing next week probably. But yeah, obviously, if you live in a really beautiful apartment right in downtown, that's going to cost you a lot of money, potentially call it $3,000 a month, whereas you could spend, $1,000 a month or even less and rent, a even larger place, but it's not right in downtown, but it's maybe not as nice, but you can save like 2/3 of the money that you would have spent on rent. And in general, fire people would prefer to rent instead of buy, because they tend to not be as attached to the place where they live, because they want that flexibility. Again, what's more important, being able to retire and have that retirement lifestyle, or living in that specific place? And they would say having the retirement lifestyle is more important. So they would sacrifice that, and renting is a better choice if you're going to do that, because one, you're not paying those interest on the mortgage, and two, it gives you that flexibility to move whenever you want. So step 2 doesn't mean living like a very poor person. It just means trying not to waste money. So if taking your family of 4 to Disneyland is going to cost you maybe call it $6,000 to $8,000, if you go camping for the same amount of time, that might cost you $200. That's a lot of money that you could save. Will you get more than 30x more enjoyment from going to Disneyland? If you do, then sure, go to Disneyland. But if not, then maybe camping is the better choice. If you have just as much fun going camping, then go camping. And you can ask, kind of a similar question about all of your expenses, right? Are you going to get that much enjoyment out of that, or is that really necessary? Is there a cheaper option? Those questions that you should be asking. So that's step 2. So just to review, step 1 was get a high-paying career relatively early so that you can maximize your kind of earning years. And step 2 is saving money as much as possible, or not spending too much. Step 3, invest wisely and invest early. So most fire people choose some kind of diversified portfolio of index funds, and the combination of compounding returns will help you grow your nest eggs. And then the income from those things, and plus the dividends and your investment returns, that's what's going to give you your retirement income, and then the tax sheltered accounts. So we're going to get into some of these things a little bit more, so you know what some of them are. So first is index funds. Index funds mirror some group of stocks. For example, the TSX, Toronto Stock Exchange, if you have an index fund, they will buy one of each stock in the TSX. And so, say the TSX has, I don't know how many, like say 500 companies. Well, if you own one of each of those companies, then your index fund is going to do whatever the TSX does. If the TSX goes up, your fund will go up. If it goes down, then your fund goes down, right? And there's different kinds of funds that you can have. There's funds for, say, the S&P 500, which is kind of the top 500 companies in the US, New York Stock Exchange. You can have index funds for certain types of companies. So for any company worth more than a certain amount, so you want only the big companies or something like that. Certain industries, like only companies in oil and gas. So there's all different kinds of index funds, and the thing that is good about index funds is that, well, there's a few things. Number one, they have low fees. So in comparison to other funds will charge you 2 or 3% every year, whereas index funds tend to be maybe 0.5% every year. So when we get more into these index funds, we'll explore more of the fees, but index funds are definitely cheaper, and they will most likely increase over the long term. Historically, all of these stock exchanges have increased like steadily over the years. You cannot say the same about stocks. Stocks go up and down a lot, and a lot of them, some go up, but a lot go down. Whereas index will pretty much, almost certainly will go up. They may not go up as quickly as some of the stocks, but you are almost eliminating the downside of that they're going down. So over the long term, they are a better bet. So that's about index funds. We'll probably talk a bit more about index funds in the future, but that gives you kind of an idea. And so the reason why FIRE people like the index funds is because it doesn't require you to be an expert knowledge of stock market in order to pick specific stocks. And so you don't have to really think about it. Plus, in the long term, it's almost guaranteed to go up. And so, that's these FIRE people are thinking about their retirement, right? So when they're 25 years old, they're thinking about 40, 50 years down the line. And so these index funds will almost certainly go up over that time. Not 100% sure, but in the past, it's always been like that. So you can judge as you will. Another kind of thing that FIRE people like to invest in is dividends. So dividends, like some companies, when they have good profits, will give that profit back to shareholders. And so here's the example. If you own a company, for example, Bank of Montreal, the price for one share is $67.80, and they give a dividend per year around $3. And so you buy 10,000 shares. That's $678,000. Okay, but for that $678,000, you get around $30,000 a year back in dividends, right? So that's the 10,000 shares, $3 per share, so that's $30,000. Well, $30,000 potentially could be enough to live on. So that's the power of dividends. That's why if you need some income, then dividends might not be a bad idea. Compounding returns. So this is kind of a powerful thing. Looks like my head is kind of covering it up here, so we'll put it in the next slide. But so the idea is that, say you invest $10,000 in the stock market, and it'll give you, and say that the return every year in the stock market is 7%, which historically is about right, I guess. So after a year, you made $700, right? From your 10,000 plus 7% is 700. You reinvest it, so now you'll have 10,700. So a return of 7% on that 10,700 is $749, and you add that and reinvest it. It ends up looking something like this. So you can see I have the 10 years, the 10 first years kind of laid out: 10,000, 10,700, 11,449, 12,000, 1250, 13,107, 14,025, 15,007, and so on up to 10 years. That's 19,671. So you've almost doubled your money over 10 years, and that's by doing nothing, right? Just having it in the stock market, which is just increasing by 7% every year. Almost doubles every year. And so if you look further down the line, 20 years after the initial investment, you're up to 38,696. 30 years after the initial investment, you're up to 76,122. And then 40 years later, 149,744. So if when you're 25 years old, say, you put $10,000 in, by the time you are 65 years old, 40 years later, that's 149,744. It's increased more than almost 15 times just for doing nothing, just by putting it in the stock market there. That's without putting any additional money in at all. So you can see, so now there is also inflation, and we'll have a bit more to say about inflation in another lesson, but still, pretty good return, I would say. Now, you have to do the math to figure out your quote-unquote magic number, how much that you have to have saved to retire. It depends on your expenses. So, we did that work on budgeting in another lesson. So that's a big part of this. You have to know exactly how much you need, how much is coming in, how much is going out, how much is going to be coming in and going out in retirement, etc. But yeah, once you hit that number, then you can retire, right? And retirement is step 4. So step 4, retirement. So in terms of expenses, similar to how you lived before you retired, you'll recall step 2 was keeping your expenses low. Well, once you're retired, you can still keep your expenses low, and even potentially lower, because now you can move to a small town where housing is very cheap. You don't have to work anymore, so you don't have to commute to work. So that's not a consideration anymore. You can just live like wherever you want. A lot of people move to other countries where it's much cheaper, and so Thailand, Mexico. But there's really many examples. In fact, most countries are probably cheaper to live than, say, Canada. And most areas in Canada are probably cheaper to live than, say, Vancouver. We're literally living in the most expensive place almost that you could find. So other places will be cheaper. So yeah, that's where I mentioned before. This is another reason why renting might be a good idea in this case, because you're not attached to the place. You can move anywhere, so you move where it's cheapest. I had a slide here for basically income, but it's pretty simple. Your income in retirement is going to be from your investments. So your dividend income, selling off some of your investments. So that's where most of your income comes from. Some people like to have a little part-time job just to keep themselves busy, stuff like that. Okay, let's do an example. An example with the numbers. So here we go. I graduate from university at age 21, university degree in computer science or business or some other field. You start off making $70,000 a year. After 3 years, you're making $100,000. Expenses are $30,000. Taxes $30,000. So you're able to save $40,000 a year. Okay, so I would say the income is pretty normal if you're in those fields. Not a big deal there. Expenses of $30,000. That means that you are being pretty careful with your spending, pretty, I guess, frugal, if you will. For my family of 5, my expenses are more somewhere in the area of, I would say, $50,000. So almost twice as much. So yeah, if you're spending $30,000, yeah, you have to find some places to kind of save. But yeah, you can do it for sure, especially for one person. And so you're saving $40K a year. 10 years later, you're 31 years old and you have $670,000. I'm saving $40,000 a year. So at the end of 10 years, I'll have saved $400,000. But then I'm investing that at the same time, kind of every year as I go. And so that's, I think, where that $670,000 comes from, because I've been investing every year, and then with the compounding returns, Now I have 670,000. Yeah, that's right. That's getting pretty close to our BMO example where I bought $678,000 worth of BMO stock, which gave me a income of $30,000 dividend income per year. So potentially you could retire already. So that's 31, age 31. If you work until you're 40, you'll have $1.74 million. That's definitely enough to retire if you have that, in your index funds giving off dividends and stuff. What if you have a spouse, a partner? So who's doing the same thing? Now the salary is 200K because double everything. Expenses are not doubled, so from 30K, obviously you're living in the same place, and so obviously that has a different. So say your expenses are now 40K and taxes are say 80K. That means you can save $80,000 a year. So in that scenario, after 10 years, you'll have 1.3 million. 1.3 million, potentially you could retire already. After 20 years, you have 3.8 million. And after 3.8 million, really, 3.8 million, really, why are you still working? You can definitely retire at that point. Note that you probably don't own a house and, but you could buy a house for that amount, especially in a cheaper area, as I mentioned. Living in cheaper areas makes more sense under this scenario. You can see that the numbers, if you are disciplined enough, they will kind of potentially work out, right? So why doesn't everyone do it? Why didn't I do it? Number one, you have to start early. You have to make sure you're in the field where you can get that high salary right away. Even though I studied computer science in university, I couldn't get a job in computer science right away, and I wasn't making 100,000 3 years after I graduated. Still not making 100,000 now, and so yeah, that's one problem. I could have chosen a different. Well, I mean, I chose the right field, I think, for this. The time when I graduated was a bit different. In terms of it was a like a recession in that industry. Now you could definitely do it. It takes a lot of discipline though. You have to have the mindset where you don't care what people think of you, because it is a little different from what I think majority of people do. And so you have to have a mindset that you're a bit different, and you have to have the knowledge. Well, you have at least an idea now, so even if you don't know all the details, you know that it potentially could be possible. I think another problem, I didn't write it here, but your partner or your family has to be kind of on board, right? Because like these are big life decisions, and if only one person in your family wants to do it, it's not really gonna work. So all the people have to be on board with this. So should you do it? Well, it's up to you. Like I said, it's one way to live. Some people do it. There's lots of literature and podcasts and stuff out there. You can find out more about it. I presented it to you because, number one, I like to present things that are a little different from the standard way of doing things, but it also illustrates a lot of good points about financial literacy. Even if you're not doing quote unquote fire, it's like index funds are a good idea. Dividends are a good idea. So we'll talk more about those kind of things in a later lesson, but yeah, not overspending is a good idea, right? For me, I have no plans or desire to retire that early. Like I like my job actually. I plan to be here for many years. I do regret not having invested a lot more of my money when I was younger. It would have been great to have like $3.9 million in the bank right now, but I don't. But that's fine. What can you do, I guess? Okay, so that's all about FIRE. Hopefully that was kind of interesting, opened your eyes a little bit as to what there is out there. And that's all for this lesson, and we'll see you in the next one.